There was a moment, maybe last week, maybe 10 years ago, where you knew something was wrong and you said nothing. Everyone around you was nodding, agreeing, moving in the same direction. And some quiet part of you, the part that actually saw clearly, wanted to speak. Wanted to say, wait, this doesn't feel right. But you didn't. You went along. You smiled when you didn't feel like smiling. You clapped when you didn't feel like clapping. And afterward, alone, you felt this strange, hollow shame. Not because you did something wrong, but because you didn't do the one thing you knew was right. If you have ever felt that, you are not weak. You are not a coward. You are something far more interesting. You are human. And what happened to you in that moment has a name, a history, and a reason. Nobody ever sat you down and explained it. So let's do that now. This is the kind of conversation nobody has with you until it's too late to use it. If that's the kind of thing you're here for, insight nobody gave you when you needed it most, you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming, because this gets deeper. Chapter 1. The room decides before you do. Here is what nobody tells you. Your opinion is not formed in your head first. It is formed in the room first, and your head catches up later. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch ran an experiment that should terrify you a little. He put a person in a room with several others, all actors, and showed them a line on a card. Then he asked a simple question. Which of these three lines matches it? The answer was obvious. Not close, not tricky, obvious. But the actors, one by one, gave the wrong answer on purpose. And when it came to the real person's turn, something remarkable happened. Roughly 1 in 3 people, again and again, ignored what their own eyes were telling them, and agreed with the group. Not because they were stupid, because disagreeing felt like danger. Think about this. These weren't weak-minded people. They were ordinary people, like you, like me, faced with a room full of confident faces, all saying the same wrong thing. And in that moment, the fear of standing alone became louder than the truth in front of their own eyes. Here's where it gets interesting. This isn't really about lines on a card. It's about every meeting you've sat in where you agreed with a decision you didn't believe in. Every family gathering where you laughed at a joke that actually hurt. Every relationship where you stayed quiet because disagreeing felt like risking the whole thing. Your brain, underneath all its intelligence, is running very old software. For most of human history, being cast out of the group didn't mean loneliness. It meant death. No shelter, no food, no protection from what was out there in the dark. So somewhere deep in you, there is a wiring that says agreement equals survival. Difference equals danger. That's not a character flaw. That's 10,000 years of evolution whispering in your ear every time you're afraid to speak up. Has this ever happened to you? A moment you knew the truth and said nothing anyway? Tell me in the comments, because I promise you, you are not alone in this. Chapter 2. Certainty is contagious even when it's wrong. Here's the reframe. We don't follow the crowd because the crowd is right. We follow the crowd because certainty feels like safety, and most of us have never learned to tell the difference between the two. Think about the last time someone spoke with total confidence. Even if what they said made no sense, some part of you probably softened toward it. That's not an accident. Confidence is one of the most persuasive forces on earth, more persuasive often than truth itself. There's an old story, whether it's fully historical or partly legend doesn't matter, about a king who was sold invisible clothes by 2 con men. They convinced him the fabric was so fine only the wise could see it. He walked through the streets naked, and everyone, every single adult, complimented his outfit. Not because they saw anything, because everyone else seemed to see it, and nobody wanted to be the one fool who didn't. It took a child, someone who hadn't yet learned to fear the crowd's judgment, to say the obvious thing out loud. He has no clothes on. That story has survived for centuries because it isn't really about a king. It's about every boardroom, every group chat, every family system where everyone silently agrees to see something that isn't there, because breaking the illusion feels more dangerous than living inside it. Imagine for a moment how much of your life has been shaped not by what's true, but by what everyone else seemed sure of. The career path you didn't question, the relationship you stayed in a year too long, the belief about yourself you never once tested, because everyone around you treated it like fact. This is the part that changed everything for me. Certainty is not the same thing as truth. It never was. The loudest voice in the room is not automatically the wisest one. And your discomfort, that quiet unease you feel when something doesn't sit right, that isn't weakness. That is often your clearest signal, buried under years of being told to trust the room over yourself. If this is starting to reframe something for you, this is exactly why you're here. Stay with me, because the next part is where it gets personal. Chapter 3. The cost of belonging is sometimes yourself. Here's what almost nobody says out loud. Belonging and authenticity are often in direct competition, and most people, without ever choosing to, pick belonging every single time. There's a philosophical idea, one that thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard wrestled with deeply, about the difference between the crowd and the individual. Kierkegaard believed the crowd was, in his words, untruth, not because groups are evil, but because a crowd allows a person to hide. Inside a crowd, no one person is fully responsible. No one has to fully stand behind a belief. You can drift, agree, nod along, and never once be asked to account for what you actually think. That's the quiet trade so many of us make without noticing. We trade the discomfort of standing alone for the relief of being absorbed into something bigger. And on the surface, it feels safer. But underneath, something starts to go missing. Your own voice gets fainter every time you choose the group's comfort over your own conviction. Think of it like a muscle. Every time you silence your true reaction to keep the peace, that muscle, the one responsible for knowing and trusting yourself, gets a little weaker. And every time you speak your honest truth, even quietly, even imperfectly, that muscle gets stronger. Most people spend decades never using it. Then they wonder why, in the biggest moments of their life, they don't know what they actually want. This is usually where it gets painful to admit. Because if you're honest with yourself right now, you can probably name a version of you that got quieter over the years. Not because you had less to say, but because somewhere along the way, agreeing became easier than being real. What would you have done, in Asch's experiment, in that room, with everyone confidently wrong around you? I genuinely want to know. Not the answer you think sounds brave, the honest one. Chapter 4. The people who change everything are rarely the loudest. Here's the final reframe, and it's the one that matters most. History is not actually shaped by crowds. It's shaped by the small number of people who were willing to be wrong in public, alone, before anyone agreed with them. Every idea you now consider obvious was once the minority opinion in the room. Every person you admire for their courage was, at some point, the one voice standing against a wall of confident agreement. Not because they didn't feel the fear, they felt it fully. They just decided the truth mattered more than the comfort of blending in. There's something psychologists call minority influence, and it says something quietly powerful. A single consistent voice, even one voice, can shift an entire group's perception over time, not through force, but through steady, calm conviction. Not the loudest person in the room, the clearest one. That's the part worth sitting with. You don't have to become someone who dominates every conversation or fights every disagreement. You just have to become someone who doesn't abandon what they know to be true the moment it feels uncomfortable to hold it. Here's the practical shift. The next time you feel that familiar pull, the tightening in your chest that says, just agree, just nod, just let it go, pause for one breath before you decide. Not forever, just one breath. In that breath, ask yourself one honest question. Am I agreeing because I believe this, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? That single question, asked enough times, over enough years, will change the entire shape of your life. Does this change anything for you? The way you think about the moments you go quiet? Let's talk about it below, because this is the conversation that actually matters. Final thought. So here's everything, folded into one idea. The crowd was never wrong because people in it are bad or foolish. The crowd is powerful because somewhere inside every one of us is an old, tired fear that says being different means being unsafe. But that fear was built for a world that no longer exists. You are not standing in front of a fire, deciding whether the tribe will feed you tonight. You are standing in your actual life, deciding whether you will keep shrinking to fit into rooms that were never built to hold the whole truth of you. The line on the card was never really the point. The point was always this: can you trust what you see, even when no one else seems to see it too? That question doesn't go away after this video. It will show up again, quietly, in a meeting, a conversation, a moment where the easy thing and the true thing are not the same thing. And how you answer it, again and again, over the course of your life, that becomes the story of who you actually were. Tell me in the comments which part of this hit you the hardest. I read every single one. If this gave you something you didn't have before, do me a favor and like this video. It genuinely helps this reach someone who needs to hear it exactly like you did today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning of the conversations nobody else is having with you. I'll see you in the next one.